Here we go. Hello, welcome everyone. It is our Tuesday fireside chat, and I'm here with Dale from Wyrmworks Publishing, and you have a game that's getting ready to hit Kickstarter, or is on Kickstarter right now, because we talked about it
Oh,
briefly
actually, it
yesterday.
got delayed.
Oh, it got delayed. Oh, okay.
So it's not yet. Yeah.
Oh, okay. The person I'm talking to later in the week, we were looking at their Kickstarter yesterday. So, what would you like to tell us about yourself to kick things off?
Well, I suppose anybody that knows me probably knows me from our first Kickstarter, which is Limitless Heroics, and including characters with disabilities, mental illness, and neurodivergence in fifth edition. And so that's a book that like probably tomorrow is going to be out. We've run into several health issues and all kinds of things like that cause it to be delayed. But we're like right there, just waiting for it to arrive in my inbox, and so that's got what I wanted to do with that is to add representation of disabilities, neurodivergence, and mental illness to D&D. Because while it's gotten a lot better about race, still has a long way to go, and just other marginalized demographics. There's still very very little as far as representation. In fact, the way I got started was I was just going to create some. I saw like the combat wheelchair and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. There's so little kind of assistive devices in D&D. I'm just gonna homebrew some stuff, and so I kind of sat down to do that and realized, oh wait a minute, this is a solution without a problem, because there's no disabilities in D&D that you'd need assistive devices for. Huh. Gee, a pretty big percentage of the population is disabled, and a lot of times we like to play analogs of ourselves. That'd be nice to actually be able to represent yourself in game terms, and how would you do that? And so that's what I set out to do. And what I ended up with was 490 different traits or symptoms, or whatever term you want to use, that you can kind of mix and match to whatever your experience is, or if you want to create a character based on someone else, or or you just want to have that kind of representation in your game with NPCs or something like that, to be able to create those characters so that they actually exist in the game.
Yeah,
And
I was looking through the book. I was looking through what you had out, and I have found most players I know that have any issues, they don't want to bring it over into the game. Like, I know a couple people in wheelchairs. They were like, "Hey, that's a cool idea. Never want to play with it, but I love that somebody created it." What I like about your book is what you started to touch on there. Is I think it's an amazing tool for GMs to make a more expansive universe versus just you have. Because everybody's perfectly fine, and then if you have the blind beggar, the leper or whatever, it's all very generic, and there's no depth to a lot of the characters. So I think you've given a tool to really create a flesh out a much bigger world.
yeah, and that was the idea. I never thought that it would end up what it was, but it was, as I started working on it, I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this right, I need to talk to people and find out what their experiences are, and so I just kind of put some calls out there and said, hey, if you're interested in helping out with this, I would love to just to hear your experiences, and I'll show you what I've come up with based on my research, and then based on our conversations, and you tell me if this accurately reflects your experience. And so I started doing that, and people just said, wow, this is so great. This is so important. You need to do this, and I just over and over and wow, this is and so um, I thought, well, okay, well, I'm gonna need some art. You have to have art, and so I put a call out and I said, I don't know if I'm ever gonna, if this is ever gonna make any money or anything. I have no idea, um, but I feel like it's important to do it. Somebody needs to, and nobody really is. I mean, there's like little bits and pieces here and there of stuff, and that's not to discount the people that have, by any means. There's some pretty cool stuff out there, um, but I looked at what was there and I thought, I've got kids that have rare neurological disorders and things that their experiences never get represented in media or anywhere. And there's kind of a handful of, like you mentioned, there's sort of the stereotypical tropes, and there's some of the more the conditions that people are kind of hear about because of aid organizations and research organizations that have good marketing and things like that. And so you hear a lot about autism and breast cancer, and there's a handful of you hear a lot more about ADHD and things like that. Um, and and those definitely need better and more representation too. Um, but I looked at my kids and I thought they never get represented, and how many other people just never experience representation in any kind of media whatsoever, unless it's some just like really badly done um, you know stereotypes and tropes and stuff. And so I thought, is it possible to represent everyone, and or provide a means where anybody can, um, because I noticed as I started to work um, that there was a lot of crossover. Like chronic pain. Well, what causes chronic pain? It's a thousand different things cause chronic pain. And you mentioned wheelchairs and um, what what causes people to use want to use a wheelchair or need that for their mobility. Lots of different things, and most people, they just automatically think paralysis. Well, that's one thing, but there's lots of other things that where they benefit from that, and so I wanted to represent, to give everybody the chance to say it, to find themselves, um, and and the thing is, you don't have to be disabled to find yourself in there either.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I both wear glasses, right? And so I guess we've got varying degrees of refractory differences, and so it can be big things, it can be little things, and it's different for everybody. And so we also put in the degrees where you can kind of say, well, how, what we call a impact extent. How big of an impact does it have on your day to day life?
Yeah,
So.
and other games have kind of dabbled in this in the past with advantages and disadvantages. And I'll be honest, I was not happy when Fifth Ed took because you had dwarves in the back in the day that would get +2 Constitution, -2 Charisma. So there was a downside to playing a dwarf. Elves had +2 Dexterity. Was I think I forget what their minus was. I think it was Constitution, but I don't. But they're in Fifth Ed, the characters are less adventures and real people and more heroic. And I've not enjoyed Fifth Ed because of that. So with this, you can make your characters real people in some way, shape, or form. And there's things as people in our lives, we have things to overcome. That's what makes storytelling even better. If you have things to overcome with it, and you can incorporate those into your stories, you have far better adventures.
Right. Yeah. It fleshes out characters, and it gives opportunity to, to create these characters that are not these sort of two dimensional tropes.
Yeah.
And my so one of the things that really bothers me is the whole way that most games handle so-called madness. Um, and as someone for whom uh, in my family, mental illness is a big part of our lives, and so to have that, the representation that you see in games and stuff is just it's not there, there's no real even real world analog to what
Yeah.
is represented. It's
Yep.
just this sort of
Most
evil.
games get any type of mental illness because it's something that a lot of people really haven't experienced or haven't delved into. The only game that I know that touches on it that some people complain about is Call of Cthulhu, but that's a magical madness that's being caused by elder gods, so that's a very different thing. I'll be honest, I kind of like how they handle it, but again, that's an external entity causing what's happening. But yeah, any type of a mental illness, and it's like you get the crazy beggar, and that's the descriptor. So the GM is sitting there going, "Okay, crazy beggar. What do we do with crazy beggar?"
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what happens is that when people see those tropes, um, and are actually dealing with some kind of mental health issues, what happens is that it has a stigma, and so they're afraid to go talk to a therapist or something and go, well, I'm not crazy, and so that causes people to not get the help that they need because they're afraid of what people will think of them, or they're afraid of oh, what does this say about me if that's the case, and it's like, well, if your arm's broken, you go to the doctor. All right. If there's something up with your brain that's not functioning at 100%, or it's causing some stress for you, or whatever it is, see a doctor.
Yeah, well, coming from a military family, you know, during the Civil War, it was I forget what the battlefield fatigue. No, that was later. I forget what they called it during the Civil War. Then it was uh, shell shock in the First and Second World War. By Korean War, it was battlefield fatigue, and then by the time the 80s rolled around, we were getting away from having too many people that had served in Vietnam. So the stigma going to mental health, because what would have caused your need to go to mental health? You weren't in Vietnam, you weren't here, and so then you get actions that are coming around in the 90s, and then in 2000s we have all soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, all going to Afghanistan and Iraq, and the stigma that grew up in the 80s and 90s of going to mental health is being this very negative thing. Oh, you'll lose your security clearance, you'll lose this, and nobody in the military wanted to go to mental health for anything. So they've renamed it. They've tried to do all that they can to get rid of the stigma. It's still there, even though the military has been pushing for years. So any tool that we can use to get people to go get the assistance that they need is preferable. I have friends that are in situations, military and not military, that it's like, look, you need to go get some help, and they're like, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm like, and then what sucks is you can't drag them there. You can only suggest it,
Yep.
and then if you keep pushing, they were like, nope, done, go away. You're not in my life anymore. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep.
Now, on the other hand, I had heard a really great story recently. It was actually one of our Kickstarter backers, and I sent out. We sent out the manuscript to our backers, and said, "Hey, if you are represented in this book, take a look at how um, your experiences are represented here, and let us know. Did we accurately capture it or not?" And over 900 people downloaded the manuscript and looked at it, and we got 90 pages of feedback back, and some of it was, this is perfect, and some of it was, no, that's not it at all. Here, let me explain. And but like that was the point, and some of it was contradictory. Where just everyone's experience is different, and so we took all of that into consideration, and did a lot of rewrites and other things. We added some stuff. There were entire sections because some therapists looked at it and said, "Hey, you need to redo this part," and or there's some new there's some like new ways of handling these things now. Take a look at that because I think that it worked really well with what you're doing, and in fact it did. It was almost in the exact kind of framework. It was personality disorders. It was the new way of looking at that. There's this sort of alternate thing in the DSM that and the categories are laid out the same way we did it in the book, and using kind of the same methodology, and so it actually worked better than what we originally had. It took a few days to rewrite it, but it was totally worth it.
Nice.
And but yeah, we had. I've ADHD, and so I get off on tangents a lot. Um,
Well, you'll fit in on the show well.
so, what we had, and speaking of ADHD, we had one of the backers that looked at the manuscript, was looking at the different sections that relate to ADHD, and said, "Wow, I was reading this and I really felt called out," and so I decided to go and get tested, and turns out I have ADHD, and I got some meds for it, and it's really helpful. And so it was funny because this is not the DNDSM, or this is not WebMD&D, and but at the same time, it's nice to know. Well, I guess we were pretty accurate in at least parts of it.
Yeah, and if somebody can look at something and go, maybe I should talk to someone, it's always a positive.
Right.
With ADHD, I've grown up with it, and I thankfully had parents that said, "Hey, do you want to?" I've always been horrible at taking meds, so I grew up trying to figure out how to deal with it, where I wasn't dependent upon meds, and I learned a lot of different ways to deal with it. And most of the kids I know that were, I grew up with, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and they were just diagnosing everybody with it. Most of them have, they've gone back to the doctor and like, no, you don't have it. And then friends I have that are older that, their parents just called them, rambunctious or whatever. They're like, oh no, here's some meds. And they're like, wow, I'm an entirely different person. as an adult.
Well, I didn't actually get diagnosed until about 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, a lot of the adults I know that that have the diagnosis were never diagnosed as a kid, and they've learned, like kind of the way I did, even though I was diagnosed as a kid. They've learned how to. They don't know that they're self-medicating, or they're creating tips and tricks to deal with it.
Right, and that was exactly it. The way it was for me is that one of my adult kids was talking to a therapist and was talking about some different things, and the therapist said, "Hey, this, and this, that really looks like ADHD. You should get tested." And my kid was like, "Oh no, that's just I get that from my dad." Like, well, he might want to get tested too.
Exactly.
It's like, hey, Dad, you might want to get tested, and like, huh.
Somebody in the chat said, "Is there a concern that people might try to use the book to self-diagnose? Was this a topic that came up during creation?"
Yeah, and we put a lot of stuff in there to say, do not use it this way. And in fact, if you do feel like this is the case, talk to a professional.
Good.
And we put in some of the sections, we put like uh, phone numbers and websites and things like that. There's QR codes
Good.
in the hard copy and links in the digital copy, so that people can get connected. And so yeah, we definitely made a point of saying that uh, this is, I'm not a medical professional.
Yeah, that's a hard thing for, because how many comedians make fun of WebMD, because and I know healthcare professionals that hate WebMD so much because they get people coming in like, I'm pretty sure I have this, and it's like, no, you absolutely don't. And it's something minor that, like, hey, here's some Motrin and you're great by the end of the week. Like, no, but I swear I have kidney stones. No, we did a whole bunch of extra X-rays and everything, and you don't. That's a
Yeah.
particular one. I have a doctor friend that had somebody kept coming in complaining of kidney stones, and their problem was they just weren't drinking enough water, and their kidneys were bothering them. It's like, you don't
Yeah.
have kidney stones, but if you keep not drinking enough water, you will.
If you want to go down that path, this is the route.
You're working on it. So I'm glad that you put the resources in there and put that thing in there, because I joke with people, I'm not a huge fan of disclaimers most of the time, just because people over disclaim things, but on something like this, saying, hey, we're not medical professionals, we're trying to create something to give people access to make their games more realistic, to bring their friends and their family and themselves into the games better. If you identify with something in here, please seek help. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and we also have like, because we have like gambling addiction and other kinds of addictions, and uh, some other stuff like that, where it's like, okay, here's the hotline, here's the uh, here's a place that you can go and find somebody in your area, or whatever. If this sounds like you, go talk to somebody.
Yes. um, what was your first role playing game?
Um, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, back in 1982.
It's the same year I started.
So, and in fact, the first like actual adventure, what we called modules at the time, that I went through, was the Tomb of Horrors.
I know that module.
And we didn't get to the end, and not because we died, which was pretty typical for that, but just because it was, you know, it, life happened. Even then, scheduling was an issue.
Yeah, and well, I tell everybody that I love virtual tabletops because they've opened up the world for people to be able to game in a way that they've not been able to before. And over the last couple of years, it's funny because people are like, oh, well, we've got a ton of new people. I was like, you have no clue how many people in their 40s and 50s that have gotten back into gaming because of virtual tabletops. They're like, wait,
Hmm.
I don't have to take, because a 3-hour gaming session for somebody that's busy, 3 hours isn't that big, but you've got to take time to, you get home from work, you get changed, you go over to somebody's house, so the travel time, and then travel back, and you're just like, oh man, it's gonna be like midnight, and if I go to bed at midnight, I'm not gonna get up until. And
Yeah.
then it just becomes a chore, and then you're like, well, hey, if we're going to game at 7 o'clock and I can walk over to my computer in my shorts and t-shirt and log in at 5 minutes to 7, and we're done by 10, I log off and I go to bed, they're like, that's golden.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we had, before COVID hit, was running a group that we had 3 different tables going. Um, and, and then COVID happened, and we said, what are we going to do? And, and so we went virtual, and one of the groups kind of fell apart because the DM wasn't real comfortable, uh, doing it remotely, and one of them, I think they went to Discord, and and then we went to a combination of Google Meet and Google, what's it called, the whiteboard thing that they have, Jamboard.
Oh yeah.
And so I was using that, but our wizard really likes Thunderwave, and so it, it was always like, okay, what's the range? How many? Who's all in range of this and stuff like that? And all this, it was this area effect spells especially. It was just like, okay, I got to find a better way to do this so that I can have a better sense of how far away things are and stuff like that. And so I did some shopping around. We ended up settling on Foundry, mainly because it's a one-time fee, and I
Yeah.
have to pay a monthly subscription. And and so we've been using that ever since. And I was a little worried about going to a virtual tabletop because, like, I didn't want it to feel like a video game. I was like, tabletop games are different from video games,
Yeah.
and so I was really worried that it was just going to end up feeling like a video game. But it doesn't. I mean, it's got some nice effects and things like that. But mostly, it just makes it feel like you're gathering around a table with with minis and a map and stuff. And
That's what I
so.
like about most virtual tabletops, because there's a lot of people trying to do these 3D tabletops, or what one D&D is trying to do, and it's
Mhm.
I they're too video gamey for me, and they kind of take a lot of the imagination out, and they feel like a choose your own a low quality choose your own adventure 3D MMORPG.
Yeah, yeah. I have some serious doubts about how well that's going to work. Just because I know just from setting up my maps and now I do love lighting and walls, um, and being able to do things with those so
Yeah,
that they can't
and
really see what's
exactly.
where and
Foundry
stuff.
and Roll20 are both really good at that.
Hmm.
So you can set up lighting effects in them, and the fog and all that stuff. I love that.
Yeah, and so that's something you can't do, in person very well. I mean, you can. There's ways to do it,
Yeah,
but but it's not like it's. But at the same time, you think about someone who's kind of brand new to D&D. And, they're just trying to figure this stuff out, and you go, okay, here's a 3D, uh, map. Set it up. Here's all the tools and stuff like that, and they're going, yeah.
yeah. Well, and you've got companies like Last Game Board. They're putting out a game board that's I forget the exact size, but it's a sizable touchscreen. So and if you have the app on your phone, you can actually pull up your dice, shake your phone, and roll it, and then the dice come out on the game board.
That's cool.
So there's even like in-person virtual tabletops, which are really cool, because then you've got a GM that can prep everything, and they just have one thing to bring instead of loads of maps and minis and everything. But then you can still actually put minis on it, interact with it as well. So there's all kinds of great tools that are coming out. I'm not excited for the 3D really kind of limiting stuff. I love the virtual tabletop stuff as a way for more people to get in and play.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Anything that can get
And
more people playing.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I also I love the fact that there's so many different ones out there,
Yeah.
so you can kind of find the one that works well for you. And you've got really simple ones like All Bear Rodeo, um, and then like I found Foundry is as complex as you want to make it, because you can just keep adding all these different plugins and stuff, and um, the which can get problematic. I've had a few times where I ran into oh software conflicts and things like that, or I hadn't upgraded uh, soon enough, or some weird things like that we ran into, or just trying to figure out, so how do I draw the area of effect again?
I haven't heard of Albert Rodeo before. I will have to check that out later.
Yeah, that's a real simple one. Mike Shea, Sly Flourish, talks about that one a lot. He's a big fan of that one.
Yeah. I talk about Roll20 fairly often because they've been, since about 11 months into us doing the library, they talked to us and said, would you like accounts? And I said, yeah. So we have 5 accounts through them that, are totally unlocked, which is really nice. And so anytime a company is willing to be, especially something like that, we were nobodies at the time, and they were like, yeah, we like what you're doing. So we organize stuff through when we do gameplay on the library. I need to reach out to Foundry and see if they'll help us out with stuff as well, because I want to learn more of the different softwares that are out there.
Yeah, I know some folks over Roll20. They're good people. So.
Yeah. My nephew-in-law just said hello.
Hey.
My niece and nephew are big nerds. I don't think her mom likes it, but that's okay. I like my niece. My niece is pretty awesome. So,
it was a couple years ago. My nephew asked for a set of dice, for Christmas, and I almost cried. And then my niece actually met her husband at a con. They were both helping to organize it, and they had a D20 on the table at their wedding, and it was if you wanted them to, instead of clinking a glass, to get them to kiss, you had to roll the die.
I like that. Instead of clapping, so at at some military events, instead of clapping, you'll tap your spoon. It's an old tradition. So at a nerd event, you just put dice out instead of clapping. You can just tap your dice on the table. I like that. I may have to do that. Hey, nat 20, couple has to kiss. I like that. So we have a kind of permanent standing question from my nephew-in-law. Now that I've called him that, I can't call him anything else. It's one of those weird things, what do I call you? So he has a permanent standing question for all our guests. Hot dogs or tacos?
Tacos.
Wait, I think tacos are winning out.
Yeah, hot dogs, I will eat hot dogs if they're the really good deli ones where you actually have to chew them, and you can't just squish them with your tongue. But regular hot dogs.
I love both, and something I've said about both is kind of no matter where you go, when you get tacos in the U.S., unless you go to a really awesome place, you're gonna find tacos kind of within the same vein. So anywhere in the U.S. But the cool thing with hot dogs is every city you go to, they've got their own hot dog. So we've got the Seattle dog, there's the Chicago dog. Everywhere you go, there's they've got their own version of the hot dog, which I've always,
they're so terrible. Everyone's trying to cover up the flavor with something.
I love both, so and I'm always torn just because I love hot dogs and I love tacos. Said we need to get a scoreboard, so I need to go back through all of our interviews, and I think we're probably 60-40 split on tacos over hot dogs. But I think it's also that universal, everywhere you go in the U.S., if you hit a taco truck, you know what you're going to get for the most part.
Yeah. Well, and the taco trucks are the best tacos in town too. So.
Yeah, and I'm really sad they're getting ready to tear down a building nearby my house and build its apartments, and so it was a one-story little kind of sort of pseudo strip mall. So they're going to build a multi-purpose building. So the first floor is going to be stores and restaurant, and there's going to be 3 stories of apartments. So really, really good for housing, but there was a great Mexican bakery there, but their tacos were crazy good. Oh, I miss them already. Normally, taco trucks win, but that place definitely was stellar.
We've got a couple, authentic taco places in town too. That, like, if you want tacos, that's where you go.
So you kind of covered why you did this book. What was the real driving force? Like, okay, I have to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, mostly, at first it was, I mean, honestly, at first it was like, I want to create, these, a few kind of, prosthetic magic items or assistive magic items or something like that. And I wanted to make them like the first item that I came up with, because I wanted to convey the idea that an assistive device does not just suddenly make the disability go away. Like, they all have trade-offs, right? And so, and so I had the idea of a ring that absorbs electrical impulses, all right? And so you can use it. You have like 3 charges a day, and you can use it to either to give you resistance to lightning damage, or you can use a charge to prevent a seizure. Like, so when you feel it coming on, you activate the ring, and it kind of absorbs what's causing the seizure to prevent that. And so, but it's a trade-off, because it's like, okay, well, now we're fighting someone, he's firing a lightning bolt at me. Do I use it for that, or do I take the damage, because I know that sooner or later that seizure is going to come, and I'm going to want it for that, and having to deal with that, because there's, so often, you mentioned, ADHD medication. It's a trade-off, and with most things, there's, even like prosthetic limbs and stuff like that. They don't just magically suddenly, it's not, Cyborg from Titans that all of a sudden you're good as gold. And so, I wanted to convey that, and that's kind of where it started, and just that broad representation. But then it was really from talking to people, and just how many people said, "Wow, this is so necessary," and then while I was working on that, I was working at a group home, and I ended up, just so many people kept saying, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, and I'm going, I just don't have time. Like, I was just not making progress on it the way I wanted to, and this is going to take years to finish. And so finally I said, well, if I can do a successful Kickstarter, I wasn't really making that much working at the group home. We could probably make a go of it, and I could just go full time doing this kind of thing. And so it was a pretty big risk, but I thought, just so many people are counting on this, and if it doesn't work out, the group home will take me back in a heartbeat. They're desperate for people to help out. So I thought, you know what? Let's try this 6 months and see what happens. And and I had no idea. I mean, even on launch day, is anybody going to back this? I'm going to get half a dozen people.
The Kickstarter, any crowdfunding is stressful. It is kind of funny, because you'll see people that set their goals a little lower so that they can get the funded on the first day, or funded in the first 2 minutes, or whatever. But then if you set your goal realistic, then you don't make your goal that first couple days, and then you sit there waiting for 30 days, and that the last 8 hours, it finally ticks over. Then you go, you're like, oh.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. So I had no idea, and then it just took off. and I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh, well, I guess there's a lot of people that, and then the messages started coming in, like the comments and stuff. People saying, I have spina bifida, and I've I've never ever seen that represented anywhere, and
Yeah.
now I can exist in D and D. And it was just like all these messages like that. Therapists that said, I want to use this in my practice, and and it was just one thing after another, and I thought, oh wow. And then you really feel the pressure to get it right, as if I didn't already. And and yeah, like the Geek Therapeutics Network contacted me and said, yeah, I'm back in this. This is great. And you know, here's, let me offer some suggestions that, because we had at the time, we had two sensitivity readers. Someone who is actually one of my cousins, who is disabled and also works in the disability field with the University of Minnesota, in accessibility and stuff like that, and has a degree in it. And then Naomi Hazlitt, who works with Daniel Kwan, and doing some things with D&D and autism, and and she's a OT, and so the comment that I got from the head of the Geek Therapeutics Network is, hey, you're also covering mental health, and the people that you have don't really, that's not really their specialty. You might want to consider bringing on someone that can specifically do that. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. Who do you got? and and he sent some people my way, and we ended up hiring two of them, and coming from different perspectives, and then they ended up writing for it too, which was great. And so yeah, it was a lot of changes, but I just, it just took off, and so then, different ideas came in. We ended up adding a bunch of stuff. It got a whole lot bigger than I ever expected. I mean, part of it was, we put these high tier things, create a character, and and along the way, as I was getting it ready, uh, Kalman Androsovsky, who's an artist that has worked for Marvel and WotC and stuff. He made a comment on Twitter about, I wonder how you do ADHD, because he has ADHD and is fairly recently diagnosed with it. And he's like, I wonder how you do that in D&D. And I went, well, funny you should ask. I saw his tweet, and so I said, take a look. This is what I wrote up. And he's like, that's me every day. Like that. Like, this is exactly my life. And then he's like, hey, do you need an artist? And so as a established, comic book artist and stuff, his rates are a little higher, and so we set. But I really wanted him on the project, and he's just a phenomenal human being, and so but I needed to respect his rates too, because he's got to make a living, and it's hard enough making a living as an artist. So
It's it's always rough trying to do stuff like that. You're like, I really want to, or I want this artist, but I was touched back to early days of Magic the Gathering. They couldn't afford people, so the rates that they were giving. So and almost all the early artists of Magic have gone on to become phenomenal artists. Look up Brian Snoddy and the work that he's doing now. It's just insanely talented. But you look at those first the first Magic cards, 35 years ago. Wow, 30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago. 30 years ago this year. Very different. So when they reached out to people like Larry Elmore that was doing the covers of, Dragon Magazine and everything, he had a set rate, and they're like, well, we can't afford this. And he stuck by his guns. They were like, well, this is what we can offer. And they didn't push him into a contract that, he wasn't comfortable with, which I respect WotC doing that early on, because they could have really tried to push and see if they could have, guilted him into it, which would have made him a lot of money. But, how many opportunities do artists are presented with that will end up making them nothing, where they've spent, 2, 3, 4 weeks of their life or months of their life putting stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, well, I really want you on the project, but, but I can't afford your rates as is. So that's what led to, is I was doing a create a character thing so that people could create some either representing themselves or an idea that they had or something like that. And so we did it at two different levels. One, using the artists that we had that were working at lower rates, and then one featuring him. And so it was like, if you want your character drawn by an established, Marvel artist and and kind of thing, it's more expensive, and that was a $500 tier, and it was $200 for the other one. But that was the only way that I was able to, to afford that. And
I'll be honest, that's a super cool way to bring him into the project and give a awesome reward tier. So you're respecting him and his time and his talent, and giving an opportunity for the backers to really take part in it in a more personal way.
Yeah. And I think there were a lot of people that really wanted to support the project. They just believed in the project, and it was like, I'm just going to pick the top tier. And we even had a couple that chose the second tier, the $200 tier, and then they said, well, I just really wanted to support this. So if you can find somebody that would really like to do this, and but just couldn't afford this, you can give my create character opportunity to them. And two of them did that. And
nice.
And we've got amazing people.
It's something you don't really hear often because a lot of Kickstarters, people, the people that want to support will, do $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 and be like, hey, I hope you're going to do awesome.
Yeah. No. So, but yeah, people were just eager. And so we ended up with 50 created characters total, 12 nice. Of the deluxe ones, and I was like, I'd never imagined that many, and it made the book longer. And
not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I mean, it's cool because we got such a great variety too. We've got 2 kobolds. We've got like a couple of them I had to create new subclasses for to fit their vision of it, and because we couldn't use you can only use the stuff that's in the SRD, and it was like, okay, I see where you're going for, but I can't, and so like we wrote a new subclass for them.
It was like, gotta do something a little different.
So, but I'm really happy with what we came up with too, and those things will show up in future products too. Nice. And in fact, and we had the at the $75 level was to put your name on a magic item, and because we had how many magic items we had to start out with. There was almost one for every trade, and or no, it wasn't. I don't know. Anyway, because we had some kind of magical assistance for everyone. So some was magic items, some was a spell or whatever. And but we ended up with so many people back at that level, we ran out of magic items to name, and so we had to create more. And so we made I think like 50 of them were just like create your own, and where people could submit their ideas and stuff, because it was like, okay, I'm running out of ideas here. and how cool would it be to to get other people's thoughts and ideas and stuff. So yeah, we had some really cool stuff. I really like we've got um, a prosthetic arm that's an ooze. It's called oozing limb, and and so it just kind of like it's kind of like a venom kind of thing,
Yeah.
and and so yeah, it just kind of attaches to you, and but it can also like leave and go off and do things as long as it stays within a certain range and stuff. Um, and there's another one. There's a spell called Swarm Limb where you get like a bunch of like rats or something like that come and show up, and it was kind of inspired by the Rat King in the Nutcracker Four Kingdoms thing or whatever it was called. Um, uh, Movie I saw that, and so it's like you just this swarm of rats form a limb
Yeah.
that supports you and stuff, and we have all kinds of like there's a wheelchair that's it's a orca wheelchair, and you can once a day you can use it to polymorph into an orca, um, and you can it can has underwater speed and stuff like that, and
Interesting.
just yeah, just like and then simpler things like uh, flying carpet, but it's adaptable to whatever if you need um, something that's going to give you proper orthotic support. It will kind of fold itself into whatever shape you need it to. Um,
So there's a game called Pendragon, and it's designed to be played for long campaigns. And when like you get injured, the injuries stay. So if you lose a hand, you've lost a hand.
mhm.
And oh geez, this was in second edition D&D. We kind of adapted some of those rules to what we were doing in D&D, and guy lost an arm, and he was like, "Well, this is the end of my character." And then I pulled up, being a big history nerd, pulled up the 14th century German count Gert something, who had a functioning prosthetic arm made for himself, and he continued to fight in battles for years afterwards. He would just he could fight with he could put a sword in it. He could grip with it, and this was 400 plus years ago. And being the big history nerd, I was like, okay, let's figure out the rules for this. So we did that back in the '90s because we thought, hey, if we're going to play this long-term campaign, there should be consequences, because we were also playing in a low magic world, so it wasn't healing potions and priests everywhere that make us perfectly fine after every battle.
I played Pendragon like once.
Yeah. And it's definitely one of those. It's one of those games that if you're gonna play, you have to play. And it's funny because I know a couple people like, oh, I've played once, and I was like, oh, how'd you enjoy it? It's like, oh, I'm still playing it. Their once is they've been playing it. They're playing the same game for like 6 years now.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it was just kind of like one of those games that we tried, and I don't know, went and did something else or something.
Yeah, it's not a good one-off. It is something that you have to like look into it and like dedicate a period of time to play and discover all the really cool rules that are there. Again, they have tons of rules for it. You lose an ear, you get shot in the knee. Well, you're going to limp, and weather's going to be a factor, and there's all kinds of fun stuff like that within that system. And it's a little nerdier than most people want to go in an RPG.
Yeah,
'Cause a lot of
those are
people,
fun though.
yeah. Oh yeah, and that's why I love there's thousands of RPGs out there. Some people just want the quick hack and slash or whatever to have that moment of escapism. Some people want a little more realism. On my desk I've got sci-fi, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, pretty accurate historical. Geez, Star Wars, drinking games, Dallas, the role-playing game, based on the soap opera.
Wow, I didn't know that existed.
Oh, I'm gonna be attacked by stuff. Dallas, the role playing game.
Wow.
It is a
Oh,
thing.
that's funny.
Yeah, it's the things that came out over the years. That's one
Yeah.
of the weirdest, like real world IPs that have come over. But I guess in the late '90s, there was companies doing movies and stuff all the time. But this was early days. I mean, what was the year?
Well,
on this?
yeah.
1980. So role playing games were 6 years old at this time. The Satanic
Yeah.
Panic hadn't even really kicked off yet.
Well, that's probably how they got away with it. It hadn't really.
Yeah, well, and you just had everybody that was, because this was the same company that put out I think it was the same company that put out James Bond. So, which
Okay,
was actually
yep.
a really good RPG.
Yeah, that one I haven't played. I've played a lot of Shadowrun's my other favorite game besides D&D. And
My comments on Shadowrunners: it's an amazing world that just happens to almost have rules.
oh yeah. No, I mean, put it this way, I haven't played it since first edition,
Oh,
and
jeez. First edition was the
and-
worst set of rules.
yeah, oh yeah. So, I love the world, the whole decking. Like the internet didn't really exist yet, and so it was the whole thing was based around the old BBS system.
I
And
remember
it's-
playing role playing games through BBSs.
So yeah, we were just like, I didn't really even use that part of it. It was just so confusing that I would just kind of go, okay, just make a roll to see if you're able to, to find stuff. Or whatever. Deckers are NPCs for the most part.
Yes. Deckers and Riggers became a nope, you can't play those because I do not want to derail the entire game just to play your character for the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah, right.
So-
yeah, exactly.
People that have tuned in have heard me say this a few times. With the story goes, they were trying to race Cyberpunk 2020 to market, which came out in '89 as well, and they knew they weren't going to beat them. And the lead designer of Shadowrun was at home with like 104 fever. Calls up the team and says, "I know how we're going to be different. Magic." So just 6 weeks or so before the product is to go to print, they start contacting artists and all the writers and everything, and add in the ogres and the elves and the trolls and the shamans and the dragons. All of that was added in last minute, which
Actually, I just found out about that. Yeah.
yeah, it made first edition just a horrible set of rules, but it made for one of the coolest worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, imagine playing those rules in a normal Cyberpunk game. You'd be like, "Yeah, I'm done. I'll go find something better."
Although the one thing that I love about Shadowrun is having a handful of D6s and dropping them on the table. Like I had this orc that specialized in this particular brand of axe, and so I had 29 dice in this particular brand of axe, and so rolling to hit was just boom.
I'm going to take this bucket here.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Well, we're going to have some fun with this. Yeah, and that's what I love about playing so many different role playing games. Well, I've got one sitting on my desk. It's a Norse RPG, and there's been so many of them done. But the guy that is behind it did a lot of translation of Old Norse and Old Celtic materials, and actually has history type books that he's put out. And then when he sat down to create a role playing game, he said, "Well, the Norse didn't have dice, so he uses runes." So you draw runes, and they're all real runes from the Old Norse language, and he has the rules for an Old Norse rune-based game, which is where this bag came from. And then those runes are used as your way to you figure out how spells and everything work. So it's like you can go from somebody that's adapted Norse concepts to 5e, but then you go all the way to this guy who's done scholarly work on Old Norse writings and has translated works and using real runes and stuff to do the randomization in the game instead of dice. Then you get awesome Lord of the Rings games and horror games, and you get unique games like Dread where you're pulling Jenga towers, or what you're doing, you're not creating a new game, you're creating a supplement to make a game more in depth, because 5e is not a very deep game when you look at it, but you've put out a book that can make that world far deeper.
Yeah. So, and my other, well, let's see, Champions I really like. You talk about number crunchy kind of game.
I like Champions because the faster you got, you would go like from, there was like 12 actions, and you go from 12 down to 1, and then if you got faster, then you got 2 actions, then you could get 3, and then I really liked that. Like, if you were the fastest thing, you got 6 actions like every other number, which was like super cool. But you had to spend boatloads of points to do that. You kind of didn't do anything else if you did.
Well, that was I was converting like Marvel and DC characters into the system.
We all were.
Yeah, right. But Batman is like impossible. I mean, when you try to make Batman, you see why he's such an impressive character, because when you start spending points, you run out fast.
Yes, well, and that's what I tell people is like, when you make a character that when you make there's kind of two ends of the superhero role-playing game universe, and it's the getting super numbers heavy, and Batman and Superman don't exist in that world, because Superman will always defeat Batman, because you super strength, super speed, laser vision, heat vision, cold breath versus a man with gadgets. Superman's always going to win, unless you're Frank Miller. But then you get narrative story games, superhero games, where Batman and Superman, because that's what comic books are, is you're kind of reading somebody else's RPG stories. So a narrative RPG, Superman and Batman live harmoniously in that world and work together very well, because when you take a lot of the crunchiness that was Champions out, because Batman is next to impossible in that game.
Yeah, he's just too good at too many things.
Yeah, you're like, this character makes no sense. He's so good at everything, and he has no superpowers. Like, how?
Yeah. But then you got a game. I'm a huge fan of the old Marvel Phaser Rip game, and from TSR in the 80s.
Yes.
And I love that because it's simple. And but you like, it doesn't work well. I know a lot of people that like to use it for kind of street level, Daredevil-y kind of stuff. But to me, it just doesn't have enough variety at that level. There's actually a lot that's been done with it in more recent years, where they've kind of fleshed it out more. But it worked much better on more of a kind of Spider-Man and level. And
Gamma World used it at its core, the Marvel superheroes TSR rules. So Gamma World 3rd edition used those at its core, which actually turned out to be really good.
No, I have a great story about the Marvel game. When I was growing up, my parents were real worried about the whole satanic panic thing. Especially my mom. My dad was more like, I don't feel like I have enough information to make a judgment call. And so finally, when I was in college, um, he's he's like, "All right, you're so into D&D. Can you just like run me through a game so I can see what it is?"
Nice.
And I'm like, "Yeah, right." I was like, "Yes, I'd love to." But I'm like, "Okay, tell you what, instead of D&D, because it will take us a few hours to create a character for you and stuff. Um, and let's do the Marvel game instead, because we can very quickly roll up a character for you and um, and just run you through a quick encounter to get the idea of how it works." He's like, "Okay." So he and my stepmom um, made up characters, and I just ran them through a little combat thing and stuff, and and we get all done, and he's like, "That's it?" I said, "Yeah, well, with more time, you add more story elements and stuff like that, and D&D is the same concept, but like Tolkien and and Merlin and that kind of stuff." And he goes, "What's wrong with that?" Nothing. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like when I was a kid, family we had a comic book and game store, and we got picketed all the time. And my dad was like, he goes, "I would rather the people picketing, one, brings attention to the store, so it was always good for sales, but two, the people picketing, you could go out and talk to them. They'd be angry about, like, you're selling Dungeons and Dragons. And he's like, then he would go out and talk to them about Dungeons and Dragons. And I always loved it. And it's like, but there's demons in it. Okay, great. You wanna make a game where everybody's playing biblical characters? You can do that. It's all within the rules. It's all up to you. You make the story. So if you want it to be bad, it'll be bad. But if you want it to be good, it'll be good." And it would be funny to see some of these, moms that were coming out and picketing us, that were just kind of like, wait. And then, they look through the book and they're like, "Oh, it's really just rules. And you guys are playing all good guys. Yes, you can play a rogue." And, my dad had to kind of explain what a rogue was, because it didn't make any sense. It's not a word that was really used much at the time.
Well, they're originally called thieves, so, even worse. And assassins.
Yes. Assassin wasn't... was Assassin in the core AD&D book?
It was.
Remember.
It was in first edition. Yeah, it wasn't in OD&D, but
yeah,
it was in AD&D first edition.
Yeah, but they were flipping through and they would just see that, oh, you're really just making humans to go fight, whatever story element, and he'd be like, it's just like the biblical stories, or if you've read the Odyssey and the Iliad and Odyssey, he goes, it's just retelling those, but with your own characters. And it'd be funny to watch them just go, "Oh, so it's not bad." And again, I always tell people, I was like, if somebody's out picketing or angry, it gives an opportunity to have those conversations. And when we shut people down and we turn people away, they just go underground, and then they become angry, and then it's easy to go, "Oh, see, I'm right because they shut me down." Let people picket. Be safe and be when you're doing it. But I've seen so many people changed or opened up to new ideas because of stuff like that. And I was exposed to it as a little kid. I remember. I probably didn't help my dad any, because I do remember I was in kindergarten, the ladies like, "Are they teaching you that devil stuff there?" I go, I was like, "Yes, ma'am, they are." So probably wasn't really all that effective with that lady when when my dad went to go talk to her, because I'm like, "Your son?" Like, "Ah, yes, my son." My 6-year-old. Awesome. Love that kid. But that's the beauty of gaming is, it was grown out of, the the basements of nerds and geeks and people that were picked on, and they just that had passions. And you know, people, I've talked about this a few times. You know, people look back at the old Oriental Adventures and like, oh, that's a horrible book. I was like, it was people with no knowledge of Asia, and specifically the Orient, which would be, you know, China, Mongolia, Korea, and Japan. And they mixed everything up because all their entire experience was a couple books and like some you know, kung fu movies they'd seen at the Chinese theater down the road. But they wanted to. They go, I love this. Let's incorporate this in there somewhere. And they're, you know, you're looking back at the late '70s when these guys were trying to dig stuff up without, you know, in like Wisconsin. What kind of outlet do they have for really digging up good information in of Japan or China in Wisconsin in 1978? So what it did do is people like, oh, this is interesting. It got people excited, and then people started going, oh, the people that were living on the West Coast that had more access to it, you know, U.S. Soldiers and airmen coming back from Japan, bringing back stuff they had recorded off of Japanese TV, and then sharing it. And, you know, we see people grow in interest in an entirely other cultures, all grown out of this seed. And we look back and like, oh, that's a horrible book. And I'm like, yeah, but there was so much like love and interest in something that they had no access to. And that role-playing games in general have been that. You know, we have some old games and you're just like, oh, they're so badly put together, but these were people that were typing things up on typewriters or early, you know, computers, or they were logging into BBSs to chat with somebody. They didn't have access to, you know, streaming, and they didn't have you know, dialing into a BBS cost them, you know, like $3. We're like, oh, okay, I'm dialing up, and it's going to cost me $3 just to check the messages on the BBS. And it's really cool to see where that's grown, and we have thousands of books in the library. To, you know, we came from companies going, well, we have no clue what the role-playing games are. This is popular. Let's throw this out. To now having, you know, stuff like Mork Borg, you know, beautiful, dark horror game coming out of you know, Sweden. I mean, Sweden was putting role-playing games out in the 80s. Did anybody hear about them? No. Or, you know, something put out by a small Canadian company, the Whimsy Machine. The writer of this is a hilarious individual, and, you know, putting out books like Fight Item Run, and this is an homage back to all the 8-bit RPGs that we played on the Nintendo and the Sega. And I think they've actually put together a really fun game without the tediousness of those early RPG video games.
Yeah, you talk about, you know, sort of seeds of learning, though. When I was in high school, all right, freshman year of high school, I had to take American history. And then we moved, and I was in a different school district. And they said, okay, so now as a sophomore, you need to take American history. I'm like, I already took American history.
But you didn't take our American history.
Well, it was like, okay, I'm like, I need to take world history. And they said, yeah, well, world history we do here freshman year. I'm like, well, can I just go into that class so that I can do that? They're like, yeah, it won't fit into your schedule. And so I ended up having to take American history twice. But at the same time, because of D&D, because I was always trying to learn more about, you know, medieval history and, you know, and all this kind of stuff to flesh out my my game and just, you know, better understand just what life would be like in that world and all that kind of stuff. Like, I ended up knowing more about world history than most of my classmates, even though I never took the class. because I was like, I mean, I was constantly consuming whatever I could find to learn more about it. I could tell you about all the different kinds of pole arms.
Yeah,
You
I,
know?
I, I swear Gary Gygax just had a giant book of all the various pole arms because there's so many in D&D. And it is really cool to see how many people that and I'm a big history nerd. I was a history and anthropology major when I went to college. So like when Coyote and Crow came out, I was excited about that game because it's opening people up to a culture that they may have brushed up against at best. And they did it in a way without like being in your face with it. And it's like, hey, come play the game, and it's done in a way that people can go, oh, I'd like to know more, and then they can reach out. There's Kickstarters finished using African folklore. I'm trying to talk to some people I know about. I guess I've been looking for it for a while, to do RPGs based in the Indian subcontinent because there's so much interesting mythology in different parts of India. So they're all using role playing games is a great way to, like you said, you got into history, and you learn more about history because of. And I know a ton of people that got into history of various types because of RPGs. And I know a few people that are in tech because of cyberpunk.
Yeah.
So
And the funny thing is, I hated history class. Like, I mean, from fourth grade on, I wanted nothing to do with history classes, and I was just like, I hate history. And then I'm like, reading all these history books, because D&D.
well, and I know a lot of people that hate history, and it's all in how it's taught. It's like, hey, remember these bits and regurgitate it back on a test.
Hmm.
And it was funny because like I remember in my history class, a couple of my history classes in high school, I'd fall asleep, and I had a teacher who didn't care that I fell asleep because I aced almost every test, and he would wake me up if no one else in the class could answer the questions. Then he also, if the class was good, they got more note time on their tests. So, you'd see kids taking notes so that they could do better on the test. And note time always started after I turned my test in. And I asked him, why do you do that? And he goes, one, have you ever taken notes in my class? I go, no. And he goes, two, would you actually need those notes? He goes, the worst grade you got on a history test in my class is a B plus. And I was really disappointed. I was like, I don't think I was feeling well that day. So, and and probably because of role playing games and stuff like that as a kid, I just really got interested in going. I remember getting into medieval history, looking into things. Go, ooh, the Black Plague. Oh, hey, let me look into these Greek mythology. Oh, let me look into this Norse mythology. Let me look into, and just started researching everything. And then as I got older, like, oh, let me go into the Middle East. Let me go into Asia. Let me and just kept try to cram as much just random history and anthropology as I can into my head because I just find cultures amazing.
Yep.
And it's
Yeah,
also
I
I
started
find
to.
very interesting that there are a lot of like small repetitive things throughout all cultures.
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I tried to start a Greek mythology club in fifth grade. So
I think it was sixth grade when I tried it. And I found out I was like the only kid that was reading the. I was like, look at these books I have on Greek mythology, and everybody was like, why? I was like,
yeah,
let me go talk to my gifted and talented class, and they're like, oh, we're all like, and it was funny because in my gifted and talented class in sixth grade, I was the history nerd. Everyone else was like math and science nerds. And I was like, I love science. I hate math. But you want to talk about history and anthropology? Let's do this. They were like, oh.
yeah. When I was the whole gifted and talented program, they were the first ones that recommended D&D to me. Yeah, and my
I,
mom was like,
I brought D&D to them.
yeah. Well, then it got banned at my school. So
So yeah, and I'm always frustrated with schools that did that. But I do get it because there's I've talked to some people, and sadly, some of them have long passed now. I've talked to teachers and principals that banned D&D and stuff like that in the '80s, and one of them, he goes, "Oh, I didn't care about the content of the game." He goes, "I just got tired of the kids bringing the books to school instead of bringing their school books."
Oh, see, we didn't even have the books. Like
Yeah,
we didn't have it was like indoor recess. It's raining or whatever, and so it was sixth grade, and so we just like pull out a piece of graph paper and a couple D6s and it would just like make it up on the fly, and we didn't really have any rules or anything. It was just like if you roll high, it goes well, and if you roll low, it's bad, and stuff, and so like it wasn't even really D&D. but but it was like, yeah, we don't think that's a good idea. We're like,
yeah. It's like
why?
you're squashing kids' imagination at that point.
So
And that's
yeah, it was like,
one of the things I talked to people about. I was like, role playing games are great, and working with kids that at risk teens, you work on teamwork, communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving, imagination, all these things that we're really bad at teaching kids nowadays. So the more chances we can get to like actually do that, the better.
yeah. No, and that's that question before about kind of how I got into all this. There's another piece to this that goes back just a little bit further, um, as far as recent history, and that is I was working with at-risk kids. At I was a pastor at a church, and we had just all these kids that were coming in that just felt very, made comments like, I don't feel welcome in my own home, um, but I feel welcome here. And um, and and it was kids that it was just like they just wanted someone to care about them, and a place to belong. And we were just like, we welcome everybody. Come hang out with us, and they would bring their friends, and it was just like growing like crazy. And I went, okay.
Nice.
um, I said, all right, these guys need more than just the like 3 4 adults that were there, working with them and stuff. So they just need more adults in their lives, that care about them, and respect them, and stuff like that. Um, and so I was like, how do we do that? How do we get more involved in this? And so I was like, D&D. And so that's how it kind of got started. Is we launched a D&D group. That was the 3 tables that I mentioned early on.
Yeah.
Um, and we had when we launched it the first night, we had like 18 people there, range in age from 15 through retired. And it was so cool. And it was just like, and it was like it didn't matter. You know, there were kids, whatever was going on in their lives, whatever their struggles were, wherever they were at, like it didn't matter once you sat down at the table and started rolling dice. And it was just like it was this great equalizer that that you could have these people from very different backgrounds and ages and everything else that were just like they just come together and hang out and all get along and relate to each other and stuff. And it was beautiful. I had like parents telling me, hey, my kid has autism and really struggles in social situations, but like this is the one place where he just feels accepted and welcome. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I was talking about shuffling some things around to make sure we had a good age spread and experience spread in each group and stuff like that. And then I was talking to one of the guys in his group, and he's like, well, if you're going to shuffle things around, you keep him in our group. We like him. I was like, that's awesome. and so yeah, it was just like, wow, this is amazing. And it was just, I mean, I had a kid that was like, so, I have a lot of, I deal with some psychoses and mental illness and stuff. And our family, like there's not a therapist in this area like close enough that takes our insurance. And so so since I don't have I can't get access to that, this is what gets me through the week. D&D night is coming.
I've worked with a bunch of soldiers with PTSD that their escapism every week is D&D or whatever their game is. Working with the tribes in the area have their own substance abuse program. Worked with some individuals there, taught them how to run games, and they said some of the patients that have come through now, because one of the best ways to deal with addiction is to replace it, and they said some of some of their best success stories have been people that have replaced their addiction with role-playing games, because they'll go to work, they'll be functional all day long, and they'll come home and they'll start writing story ideas that are make characters, and then when they come to the gaming session, they're marking down time to the next session. So instead of going, oh hey, I need another drink, or I need this, or I need a fix, their fix is making characters and going, okay, what am I going to do in this next game, which is really awesome to hear.
Yeah, that's really cool. I never even thought about that. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about with replacing addictions and that, and I never thought about from that perspective. But yeah, absolutely. It's there's enough substance to it that you can latch onto it like that.
Yeah, and it's a healthy addiction.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because we all have addictions, just finding the ones that we can handle. My addiction, I guess, jokingly, has become the library, because we now have 6,000 books, over 6,000 books in the library. So I guess we've figured out a way to turn my addiction into something that can help others.
Well, for me, it was once I started doing this full time, I was like, okay, so now what do I do as a hobby?
There's always
what do I do in my downtime?
Always a risk when your hobby becomes because many years ago, I mean, I love working on tinkering with computers and stuff, and I got a job full time, in 2000 before I joined the military, to go work on computers. My roommate, we were both computer nuts. We were in a bunch of different computer groups and stuff, and then we would go work 8-10 hours every day working on computers, and then come back and you're staring at this project, you're like, I don't want to do that. you're like, oh, my hobby became my job, and it ruined my hobby.
Yeah, well, and those things, like, I still love it, but it's like it stresses me out, because especially since so much of what I'm doing based on Kickstarters, and man, nothing is stressful like a Kickstarter. And not just during that month either. It's like all the prep leading up to it and stuff. So
speaking of Kickstarters, you have something you ready to go to Kickstarter, correct?
I do, yeah. So this is going to launch November 1st, and it's called Limitless Champions, and what it is it's miniatures.
Nice.
Is the kind of the core of it. And so when the combat wheelchair started to get popular, Strata Miniatures did a line of combat wheelchair miniatures, and they're really cool, and encourage you to check them out. I was just pointing our email list to them, because they just did another Kickstarter recently. But they I thought, okay, well, wheelchairs are cool, and these are cool characters, but okay, again, what about everybody else? And so said, okay, let's do let's what other disabilities can we represent through a physical, through a miniature? And of course, there's a lot of things that are just what we call invisible disabilities. That or even something that is just hard to represent through a stationary object. And so So we started working on it, and we do have some characters in wheelchairs for all different reasons. Um, and and in fact, this is where some of those creative characters from Limitless Heroics was helpful, because I had some of those were just like, oh man, I want to make a miniature out of this thing,
Yeah.
and so we did that. All right, but then we also we've got a character with Down syndrome, and in fact, this is one where uh, again somebody paid to commission this, but said, find somebody. I will pay for this to be done. Find somebody that has it, or that has, a family member or something with it, and get their permission to do it based on them. And so in fact we have a guy who's backed our first one, and his son has Down syndrome, and he is actually part of a Down syndrome awareness group down in Australia, and so we did the character based on his son, and and so this will be the first time that a fantasy miniature with Down syndrome has ever been made. And then we've got two different expressions of cerebral palsy. We've got alopecia, which in this case, there's no body hair at all. And let's see, what else do we have? We also came up with ways to represent, like, one of the characters is actually one of those kobolds from Limitless Heroics, has anxiety, and carries this wicker ball that's his fidget, that he uses to cope with his anxiety. And so he's, while that's like the way that we represented his experience is through this ball that he's carrying. We have another character with anxiety that has, it's a druid with a staff, and the staff has runes carved on it. And when when her anxiety comes, she uses the staff to focus on those runes, and helps her get grounded, and overcome that. And so yeah, we've got different characters like that where we found other ways to represent. We've got a character, another one from Limitless Heroics, that has a emotional comfort animal, and we've got a couple blind characters, and so I was able to work with most of these characters were developed either by or in connection with people that specifically experience these things. Again, another character is with a particular form of dwarfism that causes some, like, movement difficulties and things like that. So she's a dragonborn that uses it's a sled that also has wheels. And so she can't walk long distances, so she uses this, and has a couple javelins that she uses like ski poles, and can cruise around on this thing, but can walk short distances too. But yeah, so I was able to find somebody that has this specific experience to help make sure that that we're accurately representing this and stuff. And so it's been really great to connect with people. And then thought, okay, well, you got to have a way to use these characters. And so we're writing adventures that feature these characters in the adventures. And so there's going to be 6 different adventures, plus an extra one for those who back in the first 48 hours. And that feature these characters in different ways. And so for those that don't use miniatures, you can just get the adventure, and then the miniatures are going to be available in 3 different ways, either as the STL files, if you got a 3D printer and you want to print them off yourself and make extra ones to share with your friends and stuff, you can do that, or you can get it we're working with My Mini Factory, and um, they will they have a print on demand service, and so you can get the characters printed, and they just added this. Like, they talked to me and said, hey, how would you like pre-colored ones? um, and like, they just added the capability. It's just like if you the Hero Forge ones,
Yeah.
um, and so it's that kind of thing where, so we're going to have the different options, and the color ones. It's Since it's print on demand, you back it at the same level, regardless whether you do the STL or whichever kind of miniature you want.
Yeah.
And then after, during the kind of pledge management stuff after the fact, then you can choose, based on your budget or your preferences, how do you want to get your miniatures? Do you want them as files? Do you want them as gray miniatures that you can paint yourself, or do you want to get the color ones? And then it's just different costs depending on what you get that way. So and we're going to have create a character thing again. Although those um, paying artists to do color, 3D color, is expensive, and and so the at this point, the create a character ones will not be pre-colored. Um, but yeah, I'm excited about that. And then so there'll be different options that way. But yeah, this is going to be we're going to have start out with 20, and then depending on um, what create a character backers we get, it's going to be a little more expensive this time than before to do that, because we're paying. I'm paying the artist better. The first time around, I had no idea, whether we were even going to fund, whether I was going to be able to pay the artist anything. So this time, I'm paying the artist a little better, and but then also have to pay for the sculpting and stuff too, and so it actually gets expensive really fast. But we're going to have that available to people that, if they can afford it and they want to be able to do it at that level, they'll have that option that way. But yeah, no, I'm excited because it's just like nothing like this has been done before. It seems to be like that's my thing now. Which it's scary because I can look at different, there's lots of miniatures Kickstarters out there and stuff like that, but none of them where I can go, oh yeah, that one's pretty much like what I'm doing, and so it's like it's hard to say. I have no idea, how well received it's going to be or anything. Could be a bust, and um, you know, trying to put food on the table. So
Fingers crossed.
yeah. So, and yeah, we've had some, I already mentioned at the beginning that we've had some delays, but and the nice thing is that by the time, I mean, all the sculpting and everything for the base ones will be done, probably within the next week or so, and so that'll be done in advance, so we won't have the delays on the figures. The All of the adventures will be the PDF will be available in beginning of February, unless something really catastrophic happens. So, and I'm really hoping for that, because then in March, I'm already getting started on what we're hoping to launch, like end of February, early March, probably early March, just to make sure we've got a little bit of a cushion there. Another one called, following that Limitless theme, Limitless Quests. And in this case, what we've done is hired a bunch of different artists or writers that are coming from all different experiences, and they're each going to write an adventure that encapsulates their experience. So we've got a writer who has autism that's going to write an adventure that that expresses their experience with autism. I'm going to do one on ADHD, and we've got a guy who does universal design, um, and he is we're I'm working with him to create a this fantasy city where all these adventures can either take place in the city or outside of it. But the city incorporates different universal design principles. There's elevators in the city because it's a multi-layered city, and we're taking some of those concepts and working them into that. And so what else we've got? Somebody else that's doing one on body image and things like eating disorders and stuff like that, um, and just like just a whole bunch of different experiences to communicate what those experiences are like in the form of an adventure, and then we're hoping to make this be kind of a launching off point for more things, kind of an ongoing campaign world uh, in in that where we can draw all kinds of different adventures and accessibility concepts and things like that all together. So
Nice. Sounds like you have a plan for a long term go at this, which is nice. Um, let's see. Well, we've been going for quite a while. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap this up?
um, well, just the one other thing that we have that kind of came up in the midst of this that we've launched with our Patreon. Um, what we've done is I'm taking Limitless Heroics, some of the other adventures and things that we've written, and future stuff, and converted it into a wiki format. So it's got a bit of a D&D Beyond kind of feel to it.
Mhm.
And because I found that like when you want to look this stuff up, if you have to page through a book, sometimes it's hard to find what you're looking for. And
Having a
or
searchable database can be
yeah,
really awesome.
and just to be able to go, well, there's uh, well, when you have this condition, this spell, relates to it, and to be able to click on the spell and just pull up the description and everything right there, to make everything right there. It's actually becomes really accessible because PDFs, like if you're blind, um, PDFs are terrible. That's why we're making our stuff available in EPUB and plain text and other formats. But uh, we wanted something that's super accessible, super easy to use, and stuff like that. And so you can actually at our Patreon for only $3 a month, you get access to all of our publications in this format. Um, if you go up to the next tier, then you also get the PDFs and stuff too. So it's actually secret. It's actually cheaper to just subscribe to that and get it in that format. Than to back our Kickstarters. So, or at least, well, the Kickstarters might be cheaper because you get it cheaper through Kickstarter, but it's still cheaper than retail. Um, and so
Ultimately, you want both.
yeah, right. And but I'm excited to make it available that way. It's easier for me to use in my own games, and we've gotten some pretty good feedback, and it's allowed us to, even like, there was artwork that didn't make it in or I didn't find until too late or something like that, that I can keep updating, that without having to send it back to page layout and stuff. So yeah, and it's for a lot of people, spending 30-40 bucks on a book or something like that it's just prohibitive for them. And so this $3 a month, it's a little more affordable. And we're also starting with, along with that, and it's going to be heavily incorporated into our new Kickstarter, is community copies, so that for people that they can't even afford the $3 a month or whatever. We're going to make some just free copies available to people that can't afford it, and we're going to give people a chance. Part of it is, depending on what Patreon level you support at, we'll just automatically add some extra available community copies for people, or you can buy for the cost of one. You can add two community copies to the pool. And depending what level you back the Kickstarters, we'll add more community copies of things, because we want the stuff to be available to everybody, and we realize that there's people that are just, there's the disability tax that, everything, you have to pay for all this accessibility and every medical things and all that kind of stuff, and so we want to make it available to as many people as possible, and that's the way that we can do it, and and not go broke.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's been awesome chatting with you. We've had a little interaction with chat, and we've had some interesting questions. I think I think between the two of us, we filled in probably anything that chat was going to ask. Sometimes I love it when that happens, but with the algorithm, you always want more chat interaction. But no, it's you have a really interesting project here, and I really hope that people pick it up and use it to make their worlds. Especially because, like I said, D&D is a really, you pick up the books, and some of the writers are great at writing the novels and stuff, and there's some little, some interesting history in there, but they're overall, D&D is a very two-dimensional world, and once you start playing, it's kind of why I also love steering people towards other RPGs. Be like, hey, there's more here. You can do more over here. It's not just rolling dice, but you're putting out a product that is making, giving GMs a tool to make their world, more alive. And anytime, people, I love getting, directing people towards GM tools that make their games just more unique and more involved, and make people want to actually come back and play more. Yeah. So, hats off! I think you've done a pretty good job so far with this, and hope you keep going.
I appreciate it. This is fun. I appreciate you having me on.
And somebody asked, any plans for Wyrmwood's Twitch channel?
We have a video YouTube show / podcast, and I don't live stream because a lot of our guests are uncomfortable coming on without some editing, and so scheduling is a pain too. So trying to nail down a regular time. Yeah, I'm sure you know what that's like. So
yeah, and we've done a couple pre-recorded things, and that's usually for somebody that lives like in Europe. Is there 2021 when we really started? We started these in 2020, and in 2021 I was in Ukraine, so we were doing these, and it was like 11:30 at night when we'd kick off, and I'd have been at work all day doing stuff for the military in Ukraine, and then 11 o'clock at night, like, okay, let's go. So I do know the scheduling frustrations, and I do get. And I asked a couple questions to make sure that we I don't want to wade into territories where people get uncomfortable, or because the purpose of these is I want people to learn about projects and cool things that are out there, and I want them to also get to meet the creators, because sometimes you'd be like, oh, I've heard of that, but I want to know more about the person behind it. And they go, oh, hey, I like what they're doing, or I really like this person. Let me see what else they've done, or let me follow this person to really support their work going forward. And I've got to, over the last couple of years of doing this, meet some amazing creators. And, I've had a cool opportunity in my life to meet a lot of amazing people through comic books and gaming industry. And sadly, some of those people are gone. But now doing this, hopefully we can save some of these conversations, and years from now, people go, oh, hey, let me go back and look this up. This person seems super cool, and find games or add-ons or expansions or dice or whatever is being talked about that day, and want to know more and want to continue on. Because I hope the library outlives me by generations, and I hope that 100 years, 200, 300 years from now, people are still picking up books and playing role-playing games.
Yeah.
Because I like to tell everybody, when the solar flare comes and wipes out computers, I still have games.
Yeah.
Your PDFs are gone, but my books are still here. Well, thank you for coming on. It has been a lot of fun, and I do look forward to getting my hands on the book as a way to kind of flesh out and put it in front of people to flesh out the worlds and give their players options and make their characters more than. And like I said at the beginning, one of my frustrations with 5e D&D is everyone's just a superhero basically, and you've lost a lot of that. Well, what we call squishiness of earlier editions, because I am a first level character. You look at me cross-eyed, I'm going down. Whereas 5e, by the time you're level 7, the GM's struggling to throw things at you.
I mean, the other thing though that we worked in wherever we could is what advantages does this condition give to a person?
Just because I, as someone with ADHD, I have a lot of advantages that I have because it is funny because I have friends that have ADD and they're like, oh, how do you get past this? And I was like, well, my brain operates entirely different than yours, and we both operate entirely different than somebody that doesn't have ADD or ADHD. So it's like things that work for you aren't going to work for me. Most of my ADD friends don't do the hyper focusing on things, which can be great. Can also be horrible because I'll get into a project and be like, oh, I haven't eaten for 36 hours. Walk upstairs, the wife's like, hey, have you eaten this week? Or I get my caffeine out of balance. Like, oh, geez, I've had the wrong caffeine, or too much, or too little. But there are advantages to just because you have an issue, whatever it is, try to find the positives in it as well. So the fact that you've done that in the book can probably be really good for people that even if they don't want to play as a character that has their specific issue, they may look through the book and go, oh, because maybe they, it's always been put as a negative to them, and now looking through, if they can see somebody looking at the positive ends of something, might give them a little fresh outlook on life.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Chris, there is such thing as too much caffeine, especially if you have ADHD. It is pretty hilarious because it takes a lot for me to get to my too much caffeine point, but it is pretty scary. So again, thank you very much for coming on, and I think at 2 hours now we're going to have to say the library is closed. Is there anything that you would like to say to folks before we sign out here?
Well, I love connecting with people, love to meet people. I mean, it's like that's what this is all about. It's people, so you can follow me on Twitter at Wyrmworks Dale, or just if you go to our website, sign up for our email list, and you always get the latest news there, including not just product information, but opportunities to. We've had some opportunities to help make other games more accessible, where people have reached out to me and said, hey, can you have somebody take a look at my game and see what I need to do to make it more accessible and stuff like that. So we have opportunities like that, just all kinds of really cool stuff, and we have just the most amazing people, and so I encourage you to sign up for that email list.
Yeah, I get the "Can you look over my game?" and I have to send the "Your baby's ugly" emails to people all the time. So I get the other end of it.
I pass it on to somebody that I know. If they're looking for, is this how's this for color blindness, or for screen readers and stuff like that. And
That
I've gotten to know people that I can say, hey, can you take a look at this, and you can
the
just connect with them directly.
color blindness one was one that came up just recently with probably about 6 months ago. Not something I never thought about before, and it's interesting because just minor changes can make the world of difference for some people. And I know some people that that have well, one friend didn't know he had color blindness and just was always frustrated trying to read a book that I kept giving him, and he didn't know, and I'm like, well, I don't know what the fuck your problem is with this. And it's like, just couldn't figure it out. And then, a couple years later, find out he's like, hey, trying to go in the military, and apparently I'm colorblind. That explains my problem with that book. Because he'd never had a problem with books before. And he jokingly said, I always thought I had it because, things didn't look quite how people described them to me. But it was not enough that most it wasn't enough for him to go, yeah, I get it, I'm colorblind. But it was enough that there was a couple game books that came out in the 90s that he struggled with. So we are gaming as of right now. We're gaming tomorrow. We're gonna do some more Dungeon Crawl Classic tomorrow, and then Thursday we have another interview. So we don't normally do Thursday interviews, but we're getting somebody in on this Thursday, and then Friday we're gaming with Leanna with Valor Games. She's coming on to run her RPG that is in its second printing, is on Kickstarter right now. So guess until tomorrow, folks, we will sign off and talk to you all later.
All right, night, everybody.